Every organization has organizational constraints, and it's important for leaders to understand what those organizational constraints are, and more importantly, how those constraints are perceived by their team members and what behaviors these constraints may influence for the folks inside their organization. Organizational constraints can take many forms. Strategically, it can include things like a poor business model. Consider the brick and mortar retailers who did not adapt with the invention of the internet, or cell phone companies who used to dominate the market didn't make the leap to smartphones and got left behind. It can also include things like leadership. John Maxwell refers to this as the law of the lid. An organization will never be able to outperform the level of its leadership. Other examples of strategic organizational shortfalls can include things like culture. Does the organization have a culture of innovation and trust or not? And finally, regulatory compliance. If you're unable to pay for pay increases for your employees because you have to keep paying fines and citations to OSHA because you have a poor safety program, that can be a constraint on the organization. At the tactical level, organizational constraints can take the form of things like poor equipment or old and inefficient software that's very frustrating and time consuming that people have to deal with. Of course, it can also include things like the budget. Perhaps there just aren't the financial resources to do all of the things that an organization wants to do in a given year. That is a very common constraint. And that constraint also leads into other things like staffing. Perhaps you have a need for 2 people in a certain area, but you only have enough money budgeted for one. That means that one person is going to have to do the job of 2 people, and that can cause a sense of tension and frustration. And of course, every organization is constrained by the limited amount of time. There are only 24 hours in a day for all of us. So understanding these constraints and how they impact an organization, how the people inside the organization perceive them, and more importantly, how these constraints can influence behavior are very important for leaders to understand. Understanding that these constraints can actually influence people to participate in counterproductive work behaviors, which are those things that people choose to do that can harm other individuals, harm customers, or harm the organization itself. For example, say you have a project team that was not given the adequate resources or was given an unrealistic schedule. They may cut corners and deliver a poor quality product in order to meet some deadlines. In our example of staffing, perhaps we have a department which simply doesn't have the personnel it needs to get the amount of work done to the standard that it needs to get it done to. People in that department may feel exasperated, and that they may feel that gives them license to take longer breaks, or to shirk responsibility, or to steal office supplies, or even at an extreme level, it could cause them to do other things that are detrimental to the organization with organizational property or information. Finally, people can feel like, if because of the budgetary and the time constraints, perhaps they weren't given adequate training. And when things arise and they feel, well, I wasn't trained properly, so we're going to do the best we can with what we have. So these are all examples about how organizational constraints can cause tension, can cause frustration, and unintentionally can cause people to participate in counterproductive work behaviors.